It is exactly a year ago that I styled this tree for the very first time as part of a €50 bonsai challenge. In that challenge I took off a branch here that had roots. So maybe it's slightly hard to tell, but we're now down all the way to some of the side branches, and this side branch going up here actually has a very big root attached here. And this can now be potted up as a separate plant. And just for the fun of it, as a joke, I popped it into the soil like, it has a root, maybe it will live. It did. I'm going to make a new bonsai out of that. It doesn't look like much, but this is where it's in. It's just been sitting in this big container and it is still alive. I'm thinking about a cascading exposed root kind of yew. But a tree that just hangs off a cliff by one arm, like, I'm still alive, you're not going to kill me. That's the intent of today's styling. Let's see where we'll end up. This is the Taxus. Now I can just pull on this and see, does it have roots? Yes, it still has roots, even though most of them have come out of the ground. It's actually quite well rooted. Quite gentle. Now, before we continue, it is always important to make sure that the roots can't dry out as you're working on the plant. So I've taken an old baggie with a little bit of water, and now I'll take this yew and I'm just going to slide this thing in here so that I can really discuss this tree without having to worry about everything drying out. Now, when we talk about a cascade is basically a tree that has been growing on a hill. Something hits it, it breaks over and hangs down. And then it starts to try and grow up again, and something else hit it and it's broken down again and it comes back up. So basically you're just having a cascading tree going down. So it is a tree that sits on a hill, the roots have become exposed, it is halfway falling down and it is just hanging on for dear life on one single root. This is all going to be deadwood eventually, with just one tiny live vein going into the tree. Now, before I do anything, I'm going to wire this out before I plant it. So now it is nice and easy to work with. I can't damage the roots all that much, and then later on I can just plant the whole thing. Now look at this, isn't this cool? One of the reasons why I selected this yew was because of the fruits, and look here, there we've got tiny little fruits developing at the base of this branch. That's so cool, because this is actually not a tree at all yet. Now, to prepare this for wiring, I need to do a couple of things. First of all, there's a little scale bug here. So it's an aphid, it is sucking the sap. That needs to go, so eventually I might have to spray this with an insecticide. This tiny little shiny dot is actually an insect, and it's living off the sap of your tree. This really needs to go, and you can just take it off by pushing. And now you see the white spot on the bark. That is exactly where it sits. Now if I remove all these and then I spray it once with an alcohol soap mixture, I should effectively have gotten rid of them. Next to this, I am going to remove all the needles from the older parts of the tree. The tree is going to be quite bare afterwards, because I'm only going to leave the needles from this year on the tree. That is a little bit extreme, but it does two things for the tree. First of all, you get backbudding. On the places where there's no needles on yew, that is where you can expect backbudding. Next to this, it is easier for me wiring the tree. But it is going to severely weaken the tree, so after doing this work, I'm going to just have to let it sit for a year in the corner of the garden and let it grow. Now, of course, you can take a scissor to remove the needles. I like to pull them, but make sure you pull in the direction of the branch. So if I take this needle and I pull upwards, there's a risk that I create a scar here. Whereas if you pull downwards, you literally break the leaf off. That way, any bud that is sitting here still in the elbow stays alive and can start sprouting. Now here you see there's a lot of side branches. There's actually one again with a little fruit on them. And I'm going to have to trim this out a little bit. I want to go for one main branch, that's this one, and one side branch. So I'm afraid, yes, the little fruits are going to go. So this can go. And here I have still two. This one can go. And I'm going to prune this out a little bit, thin it. And basically I'm just going to do this throughout the tree, right? So now I've reduced the tree to the basic setup. There's a few needles here and there that I'll remove as I'm wiring out, but this is basically the start of the tree. And now I need to decide. If it hangs off of this branch, right? This is the root. It hangs off this root and sits in a pot like this. Then it would be logical, this is the lowest of all, to make this the cascade. But then I have these two branches here. This is actually too far. I can just make the whole tree with this one and that one. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to remove this completely. But let me, for certainty, wire this one out first. And then afterwards we can decide whether we still need this. But I think this is not needed for the final tree. I'm going to take probably 1.5 and 2 millimeters of wire for the main outline. And then I'll use 1 or 1.5 millimeters for the fine young branches. Right, now I need to wire it out, right? And I've got, of course, my wire here. But what many of you might not know is that in fact I try to use the wire that I take off of other trees. So when I unwire, I usually just unwire them by hand, and then you have these little bits and pieces which are perfect for early development of trees. Particularly if it is a first rough styling, it doesn't need to look all that nice. You can just quite happily use these old strains, and of course people are going to say, yeah, but those are really wiggled and curvy, right? Well, one thing you can do is you can just take 2 pliers and you just pull them out, or what I like to do, you just take the edge of a table and you just move it over a couple of times, and then it's smooth enough to use, right? Anyway, as always, you take a long piece of wire, so you can wire both branches with one piece, and you basically, you lay it out and you put the wire around the trunk that you want to wire. Here it is important that you, at the base, have it nice and solidly connected, and that you don't squeeze any other young branches. In fact, I'm now using too thin a wire, I think. Now I have a tendency to use wire that is too thin for the job at hand. On the other hand, if you use thick wire, it puts extra pressure on the branch. You need to find this balance between getting wire that's thin enough to work with and thick enough to hold the branch in place. This was wired with quite thick wire. Now I'm going to align this wire for 1 or 2 windings. Make sure that you don't get the thin foliage here between, alongside the thicker wire, and you can then continue wiring on. The root and the tree that hangs over the pot, right? Now this branch we can bring down more into here and create a little pad. Then this branch I can create a little upper canopy, because the tree always tries to grow up. So you have an upper canopy here with an individual branch forming this. Naturally, this is a process of a few years before this is completely nice and styled. So right now it's going to look quite bare once I'm done. But here I'm just going to gently try to push this down. Let it come up a little bit. And down again here at the first pad, because this is going to be a first pad on the cascade, right? And now this goes down and going back up, and that way you create a little bit of movement. This one I said I was going to bring up, right? So I'll bring it down first a little bit and then up. Then I have to decide, this is going to be the main branch, this is going to be a foliage pattern. I want to bring it a little bit to the front and to the side, just like that. Now the branch looks a lot shorter, more compact, with more foliage. Here I don't have a lot, but it will eventually backbud. So now by bending this sideways and forward, it looks shorter again. And now I can bring this back. It looks like a regular branch now. Now if you look at this, I think it should look quite reasonable for a first styling. Now here I didn't clip the wire properly. bring it up so that the foliage is more or less natural, and leave it alone. Now I know that many of these roots are going to be dead already, because many of them were above the ground, but I'm going to all give them an opportunity to live. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold them out, untangle them. I have to be quite quick because it is fairly dry and very windy, and in this way I create an open root ball with the roots not interfering with each other all that much. Just going to let it sink in here, and then I'll have to fill it up with substrate. And this is roughly the planting angle that we're after, right? So it's going to, actually I could just plant it like this. This is quite stable. It's not the final planting position because then you want it to be free from the rim. But for development I can just plant it like this. Now it's sitting on the rim, so I can start filling it up and keep it in this position all the way. In fact, I don't think I even need to. No, I don't want it. I want it in that angle. Come on, don't make that mistake. This is what I always do. On the other hand, it is nice because now it really hangs off the roots. Let's see if I can get it a little bit up again. Yep. This is what I said, right? Yep. There we go. Now I need to figure out a way to attach this nice and tight up through here. Let's see. Bring this forward a little bit. Put these at the same angle as the ones on top. And then I think this is all done for now. Alright, you're right. It was a bad idea to put it like this. It is very, very wobbly. In the wind it's moving around. It doesn't stay in one position. I'm going to cut out the corner here, move the whole thing down in the pot, and then maybe we'll get some new roots here at the base as well. Right, it is now first weekend of October, last weekend of September, and what you can tell is there is a bit of sprouting going on here. There's some buds here at the end. Overall the whole plant seems to be quite healthy. Replanting it at a better angle, I put some moss here over the top so that some more roots can develop here in the upper part, because there was only one side root, right? Now this is all set for winter. I'm just going to make sure it doesn't get a lot of cold wind. I'm going to put it in a corner of my garden where there's no wind, no sun, and it'll just sit there for the winter. And in spring, let's see how it develops. It's always nice when in spring you get a good growth. This looks perfectly healthy. I'll fertilize it a little bit more, and in a few weeks I'm going to thin it out, maybe wire a little bit renewed. The wire is starting to bite in here on the upper trunk. It's not a problem because I'm going to create a lot of deadwood scarring here, and this will just help me a little bit. Need to pay attention here in the upper part of the trunk because I think there it might also be starting to bite in. So soon I'll have to unwire, but I'll leave it on a little bit more because I don't want to damage this weak growth. Now I know the yew looks really healthy, but it is a little bit dull, and for the last week or two I think the growth has stalled. So I started checking, and in the tree are tiny little brown insects. The presence of ants already gave it away. There are scale insects on this tree. So I'm opening these up. I'm just using my scissors, the tip of which, and I just break the scale. Then I'm going to mix a shot glass of rubbing alcohol, a shot glass of very cheap dishwashing liquid, in about 2 liters of water. I'm going to spray the tree with it. Then I'm going to wait for 2 to 4 weeks. Then I'll spray the tree again. And then 2 to 4 weeks later I check the tree to make sure there's nothing left on there. I should see an improvement within a couple of days. Well, it's June. It's doing really, really well. It's time to get the wire off. It has now been wired long enough. Hopefully the branches will stay in place once I have removed the wires. It is now just a matter of fertilizing it a little bit more, and I'm going to leave it just like this and allow it to grow for another month or so until we are in middle of July. And in the middle of July, that is when I'm going to clean up, prune back, wire out, hopefully, so that still this growing season I will get more budding. But this is quite good in, what is it, a year now? I'm quite happy. Middle of summer. You can see this has started to fill out, and in fact there is lots and lots of branches at the same height. And I'm going to just thin this out, right? I'm going to remove everything that I don't need. I'm going to leave the longer branches because I can nicely wire these out. Here at the cut stump there's lots and lots of branches which I don't need. I am however going to keep one or two of these lower ones so that it can fill a pad here, but here on top I am not going to do anything with these, so I'm just going to remove them. Considered leaving them in place and using them to create nice little gins, but I'm not going to. So that's cleaned up. And then you can also see here there's lots of branches in the same spot. Here there's lots of branches in the same spot. And I'm going to remove all of those. Then I'm going to take all these long branches and I'm going to remove all the old needles. This will aid in further back budding along this branch, creating side branches that later on I can use to fill up a pad. So let me just do that. I'm going to clip out the growing tips. This will trigger further back budding here along the branch. This is typical work for July, August. Now it's a matter of just wiring it out. I'm using 1mm and 1.5mm of aluminium, and the whole aim is just to start to make horizontal pads now of all these branches. Don't need to show you how to wire, now do I? If you do want an explanation on how to wire trees, pop a comment down below, let me know, and then I'll make a video specifically on how to wire a tree. Not sure whether it is clear, but here this little stump that goes down I've pulled in with a little bit of a tension wire, so you don't always have to use heavy wire to bend something. Just a little tension wire can also bring it up into the position that you want. And I must say, slowly, this is really turning into a pleasing image. Who would have thought? Just a branch that I cut off, right? I'm going to let this grow for the rest of the season, and then in early spring I'm going to take this out of the pot, pot it up in a nicer container, because I think the main branch development is done and now it just needs a little bit of thickening, positioning and refinement. But I hope that in springtime I'll get the first berries on here, and then maybe I can show you this tree with the berries. I'll do a little bit of that woodwork over winter. Curious to see how the roots have developed. As you can see, I've put a mesh on top and I let moss grow so that more roots can develop here at the base. And I've been fertilizing on top of the moss, so who knows, that might aid as well in developing a better nebari. But for now this is going to go back in the garden and I'll just let it grow for the season, but quite pleased with how this is coming along. Look at how many little buds are now popping here in the trunk. I am all leaving them. It is early spring. I'm just going to let this all grow, power the whole thing up, and that will aid in fattening the whole structure. But at some point I will need to address the multitude of buds that are here, but not just now. Really, really nice. Right, spring has turned into summer. Unfortunately, no flowers. The wire is not really biting in yet, so I can leave that in place. So basically all I'm going to do now, thin it out, remove some of these old needles here on the inside, wire out, and also of course there's three-way splits now that it is getting really healthy. I'm taking out the three-way splits. I might prune back some of the long stalks, but that's mostly here in the top. Nextly, this is a three-way split. So take these sort of things out here, these long runners. I'll need to sort this out and create a nicer top. Here actually the wire is starting to bite in, so the top I'll unwire, I'll rewire the whole tree for the rest, thin back, and yeah, be back to you right after, because I don't think I need to show again how to wire this, right? Let me just remove these things here. Always surprising what a little bit of pruning and wire can do. This now can go back into the sun. Allowed to grow for a little bit more. Really going somewhere. Still need to work here on the deadwood. Still needs a nice pot. But the structure is there. I've not wired all these little branches because I can also do that later on. Now they're just very, very weak. I can just leave them in place like this. Right, this March I am in full repotting mode. Let's get this into another pot. A few weeks ago was the Bonsai trophy and I bought this tiny little pot. It's nice and heavy and I'm going to move this yew into that pot. Let's hope that it has created enough roots. There's still only one big root here. Who knows? Let's see what happens when I put it out of the pot. Oh, nice solid root ball. So the root ball is nice and solid, but yeah, this is of course not a nice base. But we'll see what we can do when we plant it in a pot and see what I can do with deadwood in the years to come. I'm going to lose most of these roots. It's going to be a very small pot. There we go. Now it fits in the small pot. So you see here there's a root flare developing on the singular root and there's a little bit of a bulge here. I think that I can over time carve this out or create a deadwood feature. So I can now plant it in here at an angle. Something like this. And I'm not going to overcomplicate things, just use some of the old substrate because that was doing quite well for the tree. And take the tree, gently slide it in. I think I want to grow it over one of the corners of the pot. Make sure all these roots go in, certainly after removing such a large part of the root ball. And then this, I think I'm not going to wire the roots. But instead I'm just going to wire the tree itself. This is going to be a bit tricky. It's not going to be strong enough to hold it in place, I'm afraid. Let's see. How do I want it? I want it like this. Surprising how much substrate goes in a tiny little pot like this. Let's water this down and it's ready for the rest of the season. Now where are my clippers? I'm losing everything here. There they are. I think this is ready for watering and spring. I think it is pretty decent. I'm actually tempted to at some point remove this long one and just go with this, this and this and make a very, very small cascade out of it. And at the end of May, look at how this is pushing. This is full of health. And I think with that we're going to end the video. This is of course only the first episode. And of course if you want to get an update when I post a new video, for instance about this yew, you know what to do, right? And until then, see you next time. Something 50 euros, a yew creating bonsai, might be interesting. Otherwise, one of my last videos. See you next time.